Hello and welcome to Straight Talk, Supply Chain Insights, the podcast for your supply chain leader who is on the go and wants to be in the know. And now, your host, Laura Cecere.
Welcome to Straight Talk with Supply Chain Insights. This program and podcast is designed for the supply chain leaders who are coping with the pandemic, and it's designed to allow supply chain leaders around the world to hear the voice of other supply chain leaders, their insights, and how they're planning to get through this major disruption. Today, I have Joe Krkoska from Adama. Joe leads the Adama supply chain. It's a global company doing agri-science products, and it's unique in that it's located in Israel and owned by a Chinese company. So, Joe, welcome to the show. Tell the group a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Laura. Great to be talking with you. So, yes, I have had about almost 40 years now in industry, a number of years with Dow Chemical and various businesses, finishing in Dow Agri-Sciences and then moving to Adama. And I've been with Adama for a few years now, and really operations in general. So not only the supply chain, but manufacturing, technology, engineering, quality, HSE. So the whole spectrum, which is really a huge advantage, by the way, when you have all of this integrated, not the least of which includes procurement. So having all of that under one umbrella, I think, is a great benefit for managing a true end-to-end supply chain. And chemical engineering at the beginning, and then a career that bounced all over the place until here.
Yeah, and you're one of my favorite supply chain leaders. So when you're thinking about supply chain, you've got employees all around the world, you've got factories. Tell the audience a little bit about the nuance and complexity of your supply chain.
Well, we've got in Adama, we've got a hub in Israel, as you mentioned. We've got another hub in China, but then we have manufacturing operations in several other locations as well, and sales in over 100 countries. And we have what I would consider to be an interesting model. And so if you can imagine, some companies out there are what you might consider a functional excellence or functionally driven model. And so in that model, you basically identify whether it's procurement or whether it's HR or whether it's supply chain or manufacturing. You have these silos of expertise that are built up within these functions. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have companies that you might say are very regional or very market driven. And they might have a factory nearby and a market nearby, and then the company grows from there. And you can't really tell where functions begin and end, and it's really more customer or product and market driven. And I'd like to say that Adama is a hybrid of those two, trying to take the best of what functional excellence can do, marry it with the best at what a truly market-driven or customer-driven company looks like. We call it leading from the edge, and marry those two ideas while maintaining agility. The penalty for that is what some people would call a bit more chaos. Because you respond faster to market shifts, and those fast responses are not always as well planned as you wish they were. But that's a glimpse inside the environment.
Well, how has this pandemic affected your supply chain, and how are you preparing?
Well, so I'll give you some very tangible answers to that, and I'll probably get philosophical along the way as well, because having a hub in China, we immediately were in the middle of it, you might say. And in fact, because we have a China hub, I would say probably 1 year to 18 months prior to Corona, China really did a step change, a shift in how they viewed HSE and the importance of the environment. And so we were still in the midst of significant changes in our HSE profile based on what was coming out of Beijing. And we were getting to a point where we felt like we were just about in control. And then we started hearing about these viruses and what was going on. And as it turned out, one of our major sites is just down the road from Wuhan. And so we were getting this early glimpse into what was happening. And then, of course, the Chinese government had a very significant reaction. But I think the world looks at it and says, well, maybe they reacted about 2 weeks too late. And I say, okay, maybe they did. But clearly, they implemented wonderful controls, and they're already coming out of the other side. Meanwhile, I'm thinking the rest of the world is going to take full advantage of the lesson from China, and we're going to jump into this thing. The rest of the world will not lose its 2 weeks. Well, that turned out to be a bit of a fantasy, because I think every nation has done whatever they did, and they too wasted 2 weeks. And I don't know whether it's wasted or not. I guess everybody has to see evidence that it's real. It still shocks me that you can find people who still say that this is an overreaction and we didn't really need to react the way we're doing this with isolations and quarantines and international flight stoppage and things like that. So believe it or not, there's still people out there who want to debate about whether we're overreacting. So that's a little bit of the background, the context. Because we have operations all over the world, we got to experience it first in China. We're at maybe the 10-week mark, and we're starting to get normalized operations there. And at the same time, we're looking at, what's going to happen in Israel with our operations. And as countries ramp up their isolation measures, you have to follow the local government mandates on whether you're allowed to run your factory or whether you're not, whether you're allowed to run your offices or not. And so we've had globally now where all office workers who can work from home are now at home. And I think globally we can say every office worker has home as the new base. And then with our factories, this turns into an exercise on how do you isolate shifts and work crews, honoring these big three items, the personal hygiene, the workplace hygiene, and the social distancing. And then the other thing I'll add before I take a breath and, let you react to all that is, like a lot of companies, we had a certain exposure in China in terms of supply base. We started thinking about perhaps that supply base is getting too China dependent. We need to branch out, but still paying attention to cost. The logical place is to put more of a footprint in India. And as you know, as of last night, India as a country has now shut down the trains, the factories, the government offices, et cetera. And so this pattern, it's going to happen in every country around the world. If you are fortunate and identified as an essential industry, then if you have the right controls in place, you can probably navigate this with a reasonable amount of certainty, at least around how you take care of hygiene, how you take care of social distancing, how you manage the workforce. What is very unpredictable at this stage is the primary and secondary and knock-on effects from what happens to demand around the world for everything. And I think, you're seeing that fear reflected in the stock market these days.
So, Joe, how are you doing this? I mean, because demand is fundamentally changing. Consumption patterns are changing. You're working with farmers, and I don't know how planning is changing. How are you managing demand? What are you doing around supplier development? And I imagine there's a war room somewhere where you're looking at, how do you balance demand and supply? But tell me how you've reconfigured operations.
Yeah, so part of the equation here, you touched on it. We work with farmers, we work with growers, the retailers, the distribution centers. You have to get back to what are your fundamental demand drivers. For us, it's food. And I don't know if we mentioned that Adama is an agriculture company, crop protection. We have, nominally about 300 different active ingredients, and we take those to farmers around the world for various crops. And we also have some non-crop applications. But, so the first thing you do is you say, well, people are probably not going to change what they eat, or maybe we'll start even more basic than that. We have 7 billion people on the planet, and they still need to eat. So farmers still need to do what they do. And fortunately, the nature of farming is built in social distancing for the most part in terms of work in the field and farm implements, et cetera. But then pretty quickly you start to get to the realities of what's going to happen to the demand and the demand signals, because you have your sales force, your commercial force is no longer out there with them as much as they used to be. And so they have switched to digital interfaces. You used to have farmer tailgates where you'd have a group of people. Now you have digital tailgates. On one hand, you can say maybe there's even some efficiency there, but only if you've already invested in the relationships. So very quickly, even though you might say, well, food, agriculture, that's going to be an insulated industry, not so much. So all of our operational meetings are now done by Zoom. And so the war rooms that you referred to, we have numerous war rooms, and there are different forums in Zoom meetings. I had one earlier today, in fact, where we spent a couple hours in our monthly S&OP looking at all the things you would expect to look at in an S&OP, but on every page, there was a footnote on this is what it looks like based on yesterday's data. We don't know what it's going to really change to. Everybody is actually pretty nervous about there on what's going to happen to demand. If you look at our non-crop sector and you talk about pest control products, well, all of those shops are now closed. And most people are allowed to leave their homes for food, but not for, incidental things. So the non-crop segment, you can see demand dropping already. So you don't know what your production plan should be. And you're a little bit nervous about just doing what you had planned before this all happened, because you don't know what people's patterns are going to look like after. And we don't know when after is going to be. And we talked a little bit earlier in our meeting about, okay, part of our products go to flower production. And if you imagine what's going to happen to global unemployment, it's a pretty safe bet that people won't be buying as many flowers as they used to. And so, I know I'm going all over with that answer, Laura, but the demand signal, even though you thought you were in food and that would be somewhat insulated, well, not as insulated as you might think. The non-crop is an immediate change. The war rooms are all digital. And then you're having team meetings. They used to be easy. You'd stand up in a control room with a group of operators, and the plant leader would have their morning stand-up, and now they're doing that digitally. The shift changes used to be person-to-person, face-to-face, and now you're having to use different mechanisms to do shift trade information, because you really don't want to have people in contact with one another, because if one shift falls ill, you'd like to be certain that it's isolated to a shift and it doesn't ripple and shut down the entire factory. So we've set up extra shifts, so going to 12 hours with 2 crews so that a third crew can be on reserve and rotate in. And so those are just a random set of snapshots of how life has changed literally in a 2-week window.
And what do you think it's going to be like going forward? I mean, today I tried to order flour. I'm baking at home. I used to do a lot more eating out, but all the restaurants are closed. And I do love to bake bread, and I was shocked to find I couldn't find a bag of flour anywhere in the town, and I'm quarantined because I have the virus. What do you think it's going to look like going forward? Are farmers going to be able to plan? Are we going to be able to get, food from the mills?
Well, farmers have to plant, and governments need to support that. Back to the idea that we have 7 billion people on the planet, and they have to have food. That is our most basic priority. So a lot of other things are going to shift, but the need for food is going to stay constant. Now, if just to stay with the food theme for a moment, I don't know about you, Laura, and my wife and I, we joke often. She gets a little angry with me about it, in fact, but I say, I often wonder why we have a kitchen anyway, because we have evolved over the years into eating out a heck of a lot more than we eat at home. But in a post-corona environment, how many of those restaurants are still going to be there? And so you have a big shift in food consumption and where it happens. Will that be momentary? Perhaps, but it could take years to rebuild that. So you're going to have an immediate shift in food distribution. Another knock-on effect, now that we're eating home, and by the way, these last 14 days where we've been in quarantine, or self-quarantine, I guess would be a better description, we've eaten home every night. And now we're doing something that we haven't done since we were a new couple with new kids, and that is we actually eat all of our leftovers. And so, I have a good friend who said, you go out to a restaurant, you have dinner, you don't finish it, you bring it home, and you keep it in a box for a few days in the refrigerator, and then you throw it away. So food waste is going to change. And in the U.S., we have a statistic that says about 30% of the food is wasted in our channel. We grow more than we need, and then we waste it in the grocery store and in the kitchen at home or in the restaurant. I think that's a number that's going to shift dramatically, at least in the next few years. So I think that there will be fundamental changes in the economy, in employment, in food consumption patterns. There's going to be a huge number of differences, I think, at least for a while, and I'm guessing for a couple of years, maybe longer. We're going to see fundamental shifts in how much people buy for disinfection products, cleaning. There's housekeeping, there's cleaning, and then there's disinfection. So disinfection, I think, is going to see a spike in demand for an extended period of time. I think that nations are going to start listening to the advice that, frankly, smart people have been telling us for 10 years now. There may be nuclear threats and there may be border conflicts and things of this nature, but people have been telling us for a decade that the real threat is going to be a virus. And I think we're getting a taste of that. And after what we're going through right now, nations are going to work hard to make sure we're better prepared for the next one than this one. So all these things are going to be changes, in my opinion, in how we run commerce.
Do you see that you will design a more regional supply chain or change inventory policy? What do you think will happen out of this?
Yeah, again, a little bit of philosophy. The last couple of years, the last few years, we've seen a spike in what has been labeled political nationalism. And, some people for it, some people against it. But then you have something like this happen, and all of those nationalist-leaning people are starting to look like they did have one thing right, and that is we have to understand our dependencies, what things matter, what are our priorities, and how are those dependencies affecting our life in the event of a scenario like this or others. So I think you're going to see, I hate to use this word because it sounds like waste if you're coming from a lean or a Six Sigma mindset, but you're going to see duplication of supply chains, and you're going to see some degree of nationalism as people rebuild their capabilities. At the same time, you're going to have different tolerances of risk, and people are going to say, I'd rather have one very reliable, and I'll take my chances on a COVID-19 next event, and I'm still gonna go to China with all my demand, or I'm still going to go to India with all my demand. So there's no doubt. One thing I think I can predict and promise with 100% accuracy: McKinsey and other consultants will sell a lot of chairs and put on a lot of workshops and make a lot of revenue talking about these kinds of things and how companies need to redesign their supply networks and think about their value chains. The rest of it, I think every company, every business model is going to go through a recheck. I was on a call just a moment ago with my CEO, and we were talking about inventing a new forum. A forum to look at these kinds of ideas. How's the world going to change as a result of this? Which things are going to last a couple years, and which things do we suspect are going to be permanent changes? And then you lay on top of that the changes with climate change, the changes with a stronger focus on sustainability and resources that the planet has to offer. I think those big three, greener supply chains, more reliable through redundancy or otherwise, climate change. I think those things, along with what we're learning with COVID-19, are going to be big drivers in a rethink on business models and a rethink on supply networks.
Well, Joe, thanks for joining the show. Anything you'd like to add as a last thought? I wrote a blog post yesterday that said, now is a good time for us to reflect, look at consumption, realign demand patterns, rationalize inventory against those demand patterns, look at master data, clean up all of the systems that, maybe aren't working as well, train employees, work on supplier development. What have I missed? What is your advice for people?
Well, I think, I hope this doesn't sound like sort of a pirate comment, but we haven't talked, or I haven't said much about people in this whole thing. And two things come to mind, Laura. One is people's commitment or loyalty to your business. That loyalty comes from years of treating people well. So, if you have a good people system in your company, then times like this, boy, you really reap a lot of dividends because obviously people want to keep employment because it takes care of their families. But, if you've done a good job of being a people company, then all that care and attention comes back in moments like this with people doing whatever it takes to make sure the business runs. So I think there's a lesson in here about being a good people company. At the same time, due to all these shifts that are going to happen, I think we're going to see a global redistribution of talent. And for those companies that are blessed with great business models and good insight and good operational habits, I think we're going to have a moment here where for pick a number, a year, 2 years, 3 years, where there's going to be a lot of shifting talent. And if you're a company that's willing to place some bold bets, has confidence in your business strategy, is committed to your customers, is committed to growth, understands what these shifts are going to be, I think you're going to be able to pick up a lot of great talent in this period of volatility. Because good people will be, I think, left without a chair as we go through some of these shifts that we've talked about. So to me, there's an important opportunity here to think about people, your people systems, and whether you're fundamentally a people company, and then what's going to happen, the redistribution of talent over the next few years.
Well, Joe, my friend, stay well. And thank you for joining the show today. And to everyone that's listening, we look forward to hearing your thoughts on how your supply chain is adapting. We'll continue to interview supply chain leaders and give you insights. Until next time. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Laura. Great being with you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.